Okay, so we're ready to go. I can just start. We don't need to do a 3, 2, 1.
It's running.
Oh, is it?
Because it's digital, so we just cut it out.
Okay. All right. So my name is Sultrim, or Losang Sultrim formally. That is my ordained name. And I'm a nun of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and I live in Australia. I live at a Gelug Dharma Centre in Australia called Chenrezig Institute, which is on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland in Australia. Chenrezig has been my centre for 22 years, I guess, and I've lived there since I've become a nun, which was in 2009. So I've been a nun for almost 11 years now. Prior to becoming a nun, I was married for 30 years or close to 30 years, and I have 2 grown-up children, 2 grown-up sons. And my professional life, I guess, is as a counsellor, and I mostly these days work with people at risk of suicide, people who are thinking about suicide or who have attempted and lived to tell the tale. So that's sort of my profession, I guess. Yeah. That's enough, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's excellent. So you brought up in Australia.
Yes, so I was raised in Australia, born in Sydney, a long time ago. I'm not going to tell you when, but a long time ago. So yes, I was born in Sydney, but left there when I was just a very small child. And then we went to live on the Gold Coast with my family. I have an older brother. So my mum and dad and my brother and I went to live on the Gold Coast, and in fact my mum and dad started the first privately owned health food store in Australia. In the 60s. I don't know when it was, but very early in the 60s. So yeah, we lived there for most of my primary school years, and then we moved to Cairns in far north Queensland. So I spent all my high school years in Cairns and had a very happy childhood. Life was pretty easy in those days, not too much stress, just a lot of fun, playing. So I had a very nice childhood, yes.
And here you are at Kopan Monastery, the Tibetan Buddhism monastery in Nepal. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
So yes, right now I'm at Kopan Monastery in Kathmandu in Nepal. And I lead some courses here every January. It's very cold this winter. It's been really mild the last several times that I've been here. So Kopan is part of an organization called FPMT, the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, which was started by Lama Yeshe back in the 1960s with the idea of bringing Tibetan Buddhism to Westerners. So FPMT now is a very large organization. Our spiritual director is Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And we have I think in excess of 155 centers and projects and groups all around the world in many, many countries. And Chenrezig Institute, where I live, is one of those. So yes, so I was invited a number of years ago to come here and lead some courses around mindfulness and this thing called the 16 Guidelines, which is sort of, I guess you would say, is like a transcript on how we can lead a meaningful and happy life. And yeah, so I come here, very fortunate to be able to come here once a year in January each year. Sometimes more than once, but for the next couple of years it will just be January. Yeah, beautiful place.
I have a question that I think many people are wondering too. What made your decision to become a nun?
Why did I become a nun? I guess mostly because I recognized I guess you would say futility, the futility of worldly material existence. And I had just gone up to Chenrezig to live for 12 months after the global financial crisis. The organisation I worked for had run out of money, so I thought good opportunity to go up there and work for, learn for a year. So I went up there to live full time, and very quickly I recognised that I wanted to follow a spiritual journey, and that it's really hard to do that in worldly life. And so, yeah, so that was, then I requested to become a nun. Broke the news to my husband at the time that this is what I was going to do, but he was very kind and generous and supportive. A little sad for himself, but very supportive of me, which I'm astoundingly grateful for. And yeah, so I made the request, and then within 6 weeks I was ordained. So I became a nun very, very quickly. Best decision I've ever made. Don't regret it for a second. Madly in love with this tradition, this Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and the philosophy and the principles behind it, and really love the ordained life. It's very difficult. It's a difficult life being a Western Sangha, a Western ordained person, but you know, that's okay. That's just part of the journey, but absolutely the best decision I've ever made. Yeah, love it.
That's wonderful. And you, in your current way of living, and so if you had unlimited resources to do whatever you dreamed of doing in life, what would that be?
If I had unlimited resources and the ability to do whatever, I would spend a lot of time in retreat. I left Australia at the end of 2013 to go on a bit of an exploring journey to discover the other traditions in the Tibetan Buddhist, the other schools rather in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and found then, I guess, the enormous value and the enormous benefit of being able to do retreat. So if I had unlimited resources, particularly financial resources, because even though one can do retreat in places like Australia or in the West, it's ridiculously expensive to do that. Whereas in India and Nepal, it's much cheaper to do retreat here. But in addition to that, this is where so many masters across the lineages in Tibetan Buddhism have actually attained realizations. And so many of the retreat places are places where people have done that. You know, our masters of the past, both male and female, have attained very high realizations. And so to be able to do retreat in those places just gives you an extra energy to draw upon, you know, that extra resource of that energy that stays in those retreat places. And I've learned, I've had the good fortune of being able to do a little bit of retreat over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And I've learnt so much by doing retreat, you know, by staying in silence and being in solitude. And so to have an opportunity to do it in a more intense way would absolutely be my dream come true. So if I had that capacity, that's definitely what I would do. I would spend much more time doing solitary, longer term solitary retreat, yeah, for sure. And
what is that you would attain in those retreats?
So I guess the purpose of going into retreat is it gives you the time and the space to really look inwardly in a much more deep way. You know, right now, you know, we're very easily distracted. And even retreat places that I have had the fortune to be able to do a little retreat in, they're quite luxurious. And this in and of itself can be a distraction. So to go to places like India and Nepal that are much more basic, and so the distraction is far less. You know, you have the time and the space and the opportunity to just focus on your practice and to really look inwardly. You know, to start to see our attachment and our anger and our distraction and, you know, all of these things that are the obstacle to having realizations, you know, to recognizing how extraordinary this life is. And so retreat gives you the time and the space to be able to just look more deeply internally. without having all of those external distractions that tend to be there just on a daily basis otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you could give an advice to people, what would that be?
So I will try, if I had to give advice, I will try and do this without crying. My advice, I don't think it's going to work. My advice is to just be kind. It's ridiculous how this happens every time I talk about this. It is the greatest skill of being human is to practice this kindness, and yet it's so hard for us to do. And I really wish with every atom of my being that people just be kind. No agenda, no expectation of return. Just be kind to each other. Be kind to each other, be kind to all beings, and maybe our world would be a more peaceful place. I don't know why I cry every time I talk about this, but I can't help it. Sorry. So this is my true wish, that people just be kind. It's liberating, you know, to be kind. We don't have to. You know, we often think kindness is something that is passive, and that kindness necessarily means that we will be abused and bullied and taken advantage of if we're kind. You know, it's so often seen as a weakness. And this is not the case. You know, kindness is so empowering. It brings you strength and it brings you courage. And we all know what it's like to experience it, and we all know what it's like to offer it. It's a very, very powerful thing. So if we could all just, you know, let go of our self-centeredness and our self-interest and just be kind, I really do believe the world would change slowly by slowly. So yes, please practice kindness.
You have the best wisdom, and you're so wise, and this is so beautiful, really. Thank you for sharing this.
Okay.
And
thank you.
I want to ask if you would be happy, or if it would in any way be inspiring for you to know if the public, what their reaction to your story.
Look, I don't know. I mean, you know, this is karma. If this is inspiring for people, it's simply that they have the karma to be inspired. You know, if it's not inspiring, it just means that they don't have the karma to be inspired at this time, at this moment. You know, what to do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Carla. You are an inspiration for me, and it really, really matters.
Okay, thank you.
You matter. You matter.
Thank you. It's very kind. Make me very embarrassed saying that.